Welcome to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. I am Club President Darren Miller, President and owner of JM Construction. As we gather virtually for our 21st virtual program in our club's 108-year history, we'll continue our tradition of reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, John Hine, counsel with Davis and Kielthal, will give our invocation.
In this invocation, fellow Rotarians, as we gather today from our remote locations to participate in our weekly meeting through the technology of Zoom and YouTube, let us pause to reflect upon the value we derive from our membership in Rotary and the opportunities technology provides to enable us to meet during these challenging times. And let us be open to embrace all of the opportunities afforded us through Rotary to remind us that we are part of this community. And now, as we prepare to learn and engage in a conversation about equality, equity, and justice, let us be mindful of the fact that while we seek these values for ourselves, we often neglect them for others.
Thank you, John. Before we begin our program today, we're going to start off with a bit of club business. Margaret Crawford, retired Assistant Director of Human Resources at Northwestern Mutual and co-chair of the RCM Scholarship Committee, will now introduce our newest Rotary Club Milwaukee Scholars.
Thank you, President Darren. We started the RCM Scholarship Program in 2009, and to date, we've touched the lives of 66 students with 25 graduates. Nationally, only 11% of students that have similar profiles to our students graduate within 6 years. We're very proud to say that 61% of our students graduate within 6 years, and most of them graduate within 4 years. We find that often our mentoring is more important than our money. Each student is assigned one or more mentors who give guidance, career, and personal advice and help them to navigate the college experience, because in many cases, these scholars are the first from their family to attend college. Mentoring is one of the most rewarding activities a Rotarian can undertake. If you'd like to learn more, please give me a call or contact me. This year's group of students was impressive. We had over 80 applications, and I'm excited to introduce our 4 new scholarship recipients: Jacinta Tial, Kevin Simmons, Leah Moore, and Mario Mendez. First of all, Jacinta Tial is a graduate of Ronald Reagan High School. She will attend Marquette University to study marketing. She would like to own her own Burmese grocery store to bring people of all different cultures together to create a stronger community through food. Jacinta also shares her creativity through song and dance with her Chin community. Jacinta is the newest recipient of the Gordon and Elizabeth Smith Scholarship, and Sister Kathleen O'Brien will serve as her mentor. Congratulations, Jacinta. Next, Kevin Simmons. He's a graduate of Rufus King High School. He will attend Marian University to study Management Information Systems. Kevin wants to be an IT security specialist and enjoys not only writing, but also reciting poetry. Kevin is the recipient of the Mary and Bill Hurd and Rosina Baker Barber Scholarship. Wendell Willis will serve as his mentor. Congratulations, Kevin. Next, Leah Moore. Leah Moore is a graduate of Rufus King High School. Leah is the second recipient of the RCM Leadership Scholarship, which is awarded to a student who exemplifies promise and potential to be a leader in the Milwaukee community. She will attend UW Oshkosh to study nursing. Her future plans include becoming a neonatal nurse. Jackie Hurd Barber will serve as her mentor. Congratulations, Leah. And finally, Mario Mendez. He also is a graduate of Ronald Reagan High School and will attend MATC. He is planning to major in criminal justice and intends to pursue his dream of becoming an immigration lawyer. In high school, Mario was active in both forensics and debate. Margaret Cry will serve as his mentor. Congratulations, Mario. Congratulations to all of our new scholars. 75% of the funding for our scholarship program comes from the proceeds from the annual Rotary Club of Milwaukee Scholarship Golf Classic and Dinner. Thanks to all of you who contribute to and work hard to make this event a success. I would also like to just take a moment to honor our longtime Rotarian and co-founder of the RCM Scholarship Program, Bill Adams. In addition, another named scholarship is the Jim and Judy Ford Scholarship, created by Jim and Judy, who saw firsthand the benefits of providing financial and mentoring assistance to the RCM scholars. Another named scholarship, the James I. Miller III Scholarship, was created by Jim Miller to honor his son. Gordon and Elizabeth Smith Scholarship, founded by Tom and Jeannie Smith, was put together in memory of their parents, who were firm believers in strong public education systems. Tom and Jeannie recently donated $50,000 to support an additional scholarship. The Cara E. Lovell Scholarship was created by an anonymous donor to honor retired MPS teacher Cara Lovell. And finally, the Mary and Bill Hurd and Rosina Baker Barber Scholarship was endowed by Jackie Hurd Barber and her husband Michael Barber to honor their parents. This scholarship supports an African-American graduate of MPS who intends to pursue a career in science, technology, engineering, math, or teaching. Thank you all for your strong support. If you are interested in creating a named scholarship fund, please contact the Rotary office. We would like to also thank Brenda Campbell, the president and CEO of Secure Futures, who arranged a financially focused program for our summer scholar gathering, which was held virtually last month. Students walked away with a better understanding of how to set a realistic budget and also how to plan for their financial futures. Finally, I would also like to thank the RCM Scholarship Committee and mentors, and to Ann Keenan, who has served as our scholarship coordinator over the last couple of years. Thank you all for your dedication and service.
Thank you, Margaret. It's always great to have our scholars join this program. As you mentioned earlier, 75% of our scholarship funding comes from the annual golf outing. We're looking forward to this year's RCM Scholarship Golf Classic on Monday, August 31st. Golf registration is currently full, but for those who are comfortable, we will welcome Rotarians and your guests to join us for a socially distanced outdoor cocktail reception following the golf at 5 p.m. Cost is $45 to attend, and will feature heavy appetizers and an auction. See the link in this morning's email to register for attendance. For those who can't be there, the silent auction will open online next Monday, August 24th. Look for more information on that. The Salvation Army is looking for volunteers to pack 1,000 boxes of food to be distributed to families. The packing will take place August 25th through 27th at the Salvation Army's Distribution Center, located at 5880 North 60th Street in Milwaukee. Salvation Army is working in accordance with CDC guidelines as it relates to protecting volunteers and staff members. See the link in this morning's email for more information and to register to help. Thank you again to Brett Hazelton and Sherry Williams-Pinnell for their program last week about the upcoming Milwaukee Black Theater Festival. The program is now up on our YouTube channel. Rotary is a proud sponsor of this event, and you can learn more about it by following the link in this morning's email. This Thursday, we're welcoming back our resident COVID expert, Dr. Bob Gleason. He will discuss the current status of COVID-19 in Wisconsin and the 5-county area, the vaccine timetable, and what to expect when schools and colleges reopen. As we look for ways to incorporate more interaction into our Tuesday programs, if you're joining us live on Zoom today, when we get to the Q&A portion of the program, the format will change and you'll be able to see your fellow Rotarians in the audience. Switch to gallery view at this time to enable that option. During that time, please continue to chat your questions or submit questions in the chat function. After the program ends today, you can stick around for a more lively and informal conversation. Finally, there will be more to follow on this, but we hope to welcome Rotarians back to Memorial Hall on September 1st. Of course, for those who prefer the comfort of home or office, the virtual option will always be available. Again, there's more to follow on that. And now, Mary McCormick will introduce our speakers.
Thank you, President Darren. Before I introduce the speakers, I want to just say that about a year ago, the Rotary Board made a commitment to bring programming forward to the club that would advance our understanding and awareness of structural racism and its impact on the community. And that commitment was recently reaffirmed, and that I want to say is you can really count on in the near future that about once a month we will have a program that really is intended to work on building that understanding and building that awareness. And I'm very pleased to say that today we have two very compelling and insightful speakers who are going to help us do exactly that. Reggie Jackson has been a much sought after speaker, researcher, and writer for over a decade. He specializes in sharing seldom told stories and facts about the experiences of African Americans and other peoples of color, past and present, helping institutions and individuals understand how our country's racial hierarchy developed historically and the impact it has on our lives today. Mr. Jackson is the co-founder and lead trainer consultant for Nurturing Diversity Partners, a consulting firm that fosters diversity, inclusion, equity within institutions and communities. He writes and provides background on current racial issues to regional, national, and international media. And so we are very, very privileged to have him with us today to help us all understand how structural racism impacts the life of everybody in our community. We are also joined again by Rotary member, Dr. Eve Hall, who serves as the president and CEO of the Milwaukee Urban League. A native of Milwaukee, Dr. Hall previously served as the president and CEO of the African American Chamber of Commerce, where she led the renewal and revival of this organization. Dr. Hall also served as the Chief Innovation Officer of the Thurgood Marshall Fund, where she spent 10 years in various national leadership roles impacting students and university school district partnerships in several states. She is the co-founder of the African American Women's Project Fund, created in 1999, designed to support the organization supporting the well-being of women and girls. She earned a BS degree in educational psychology from Florida A&M University, an MS in administrative leadership from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and a doctorate in educational leadership from Cardinal Stritch University. She's a familiar face here in Rotary, and I'm very glad to welcome both Dr. Hall and Mr. Jackson. So thank you.
Well, good morning, or actually good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Mary. Dr. Hall, it's always great to be in the space with you. Appreciate the Rotary Club reaching out to both of us to really have a conversation about kind of the current state of affairs here locally as well as nationally. You know, as you and I were talking over the past couple of days about what our conversation would entail, you know, it was very interesting to me as you were sharing a little bit about the history of your organization and the work that they were doing about a century ago that's very closely related to what's going on today. Maybe it would be a good idea for you to maybe share kind of the history of the Urban League so that people can kind of understand that that work has been ongoing for a very long time.
Right. Thanks, Reggie. And yeah, it's been great talking to you too. So, as we were talking, interestingly, the Urban League as an organization was founded back in the early 1900s, 1910 to be exact, 1919 here in Milwaukee. And it was around a time frame in our country when there was that great migration of, millions of African American individuals and families moving from the South to the North for a better way of life. And, as that started to occur, there was a realization that as we started to enter these different cities, people were not used to having us in these cities in a way that we were now arriving to seek housing, to seek employment, healthcare, education, etc. And so it was actually Blacks and whites that came together in New York discussing this matter. And thus the Urban League was created to be that urban advocacy organization to actually welcome, support, and embrace families as they enter the cities, but to also serve as a liaison with the city fathers on the importance of their inclusion, on the importance of access to resources, the inclusion in becoming entrepreneurs. I mean, just the being able to be a part of society up north. And so, so that was a movement throughout this country, which resulted in what we now today have 90 affiliates in across the country, basically 34 states and the District of Columbia representing 300 communities. What we are saying in the Urban League movement is that we were actually built and designed for what is occurring today. Issues, quite frankly, that have never left us, because as a Black community, quite frankly, we've been talking about this for centuries, for decades. The difference today is that the conversation has broadened to a place where our white colleagues and friends and associates have really been a part of what we've been feeling as a result of social media. And quite frankly, the George Floyd situation that everyone saw during a time that almost America was somewhat shut down. And I think it caused a different kind of realization of understanding of the inequities that were occurring, compiled by COVID, and who was being affected and who was able to navigate what was now occurring. Thus, you had the marches that now reflected a true diversity of individuals in a way very different than before, once again, that expanded even to suburbs and small towns around this country. So it is now a conversation that has risen to a new level, and I believe a place where we can really converse, resolve, implement change. And because we now live together in different ways, we're marrying, we have interracial marriages, we have interracial adoptions. Many of our schools are integrated. It serves as a different kind of environment, but it goes back to, again, I kind of go back to my place of where I am now, that it took Blacks and whites together to actually start to problem solve and identify what was occurring in this country.
Yeah, those are all brilliant points. I think part of what's unique about today is that we have seen more whites joining the movement to protest systemic structural racism in this country in a way that we've never seen before. There have been multiple news reports about here in the state of Wisconsin that 45 different cities and towns in Wisconsin have had some type of marches. My work over the last several years with Nurturing Diversity Partners, I've been afforded the opportunity to travel to 35 different communities throughout the state of Wisconsin doing work related to race and racism. And my business partner, Dr. Fran Kaplan, and I have been telling people as we've done this work over the last 3 years as Nurturing Diversity Partners that we saw this coming in terms of the number of whites that would be involved in this. because we've had communities that are, mostly white communities reach out to us to have us come to their communities and do talks and workshops and things of that nature, facilitated dialogue with people who really want to talk about these things in a way that they never have before. And so we weren't really all that shocked to see this groundswell of support from the white community, because we've seen it ourselves in the places that we've been. What's been surprising, though, to me, is that we are having the types of conversations that people generally find very difficult to have. And there's always going to be pushback against those conversations, but I'm seeing that people are much more courageous about having these conversations now, that they are willing to learn. And I've always said this, when it comes to having conversations about race and racism, what makes it really difficult for many Americans is that we don't know our history very well. The way that we teach history is the way that most countries teach history. We teach it to make, our citizens patriots and lovers of their country. And so we leave a lot of the ugly parts of our history out of the history classes and textbooks. But now people are beginning to explore those histories in a way that they haven't before. And as a result of knowing more, people are having what I call productive conversations, where they actually know what they're talking about. And it's been really great for me to be a part of that, and having organizations reach out to us to do training for them in different faith-based organizations, colleges, universities, K-12 school districts, Medical College of Wisconsin, so many different areas that we've worked in. And obviously the work that we do is closely aligned with what your organization does. It's really about raising awareness, right? And then really providing people with opportunities and access to resources that they've been marginalized and not been able to get access to those things in the past. And I found, especially recently, that more people are reaching out to me to ask how they can help, which I think is a big change. People generally come into our community and say, well, you need to do this, or you need to do that. But now they're beginning to come in with a mindset where they're saying, what can I do to help? What do you need? And is there a way that I can provide you with access to those resources? And I'm sure that's something that you've seen as well, Dr. Hall.
Yeah, I have quite a bit with companies. And I will tell you, being a part of Rotary, the openness of Rotary now to continue conversations. I mean, Rotary has already been involved in conversations around, structural racism. They've started that, as Mary indicated earlier. But what's important is that we have to have the discussions between individuals such as Rotarians who represent significant roles in this community, whether it's in business or community organizations or volunteer efforts, because it will be through the influencers that will help to make the difference. It will be through the influencers, I believe, that if they're involved in the difficult conversations and we're able to create the climate or that tone of a meeting where people can say what typically they're not comfortable in saying. It's funny, I was just part of Epstein Ewan. Many people know Epstein Ewan. Rich Tennyson is the president. He intentionally created these circles that he's having, I think, once a month or every few weeks. And the one that I was a part of was questions, I'll be blunt, questions why people wanted to ask were always afraid to ask. Mm-hmm. And so what it did, the questions that came through, we were all able to have a really great exchange of what people were feeling. Mm-hmm. And I think it's that type of courage that will help us through this, because race relations discussions have always been difficult. But I believe that when, we have the right facilitator and just the willingness to say, we're going to work through this, because at the end of the day, we are all in this world together. We can't hide and run from each other. At some point, the two shall meet. Mm-hmm. So why not look at how we continue to grow a more vibrant country?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we talk about at our organization as we go out and do training is that, part of what makes the conversations difficult is not just the lack of knowledge historically, but also the lack of contact. We live in the most segregated metropolitan area in the United States. Most people aren't aware of what caused that segregation. They don't know the reality of the role that federal, state, local governments, realtors, bankers played in creating the segregated spaces that we live in. And they don't really think about the impact that it has when you have white communities in particular that really don't have many people of color, and they don't have regular contact with people from different communities, particularly the Black community. And what ends up happening is things that people think they know about the Black community are based on things that they see in television and movies, things they read in the newspaper, see on the news, but they don't really get a clear understanding of what's happening on a day-to-day in those communities because they don't have those conversations or experiences. And for me, one of my driving forces behind the work that I do is my lived experience. I tell people all the time that I came into the world dealing with segregation. The day that I was born in October of 1965 in a little town in Mississippi, it was a Jim Crow town still at that time. And it was a segregated hospital. And when my mother went into labor and she and I walked up to that hospital, we had to go through the back door of the hospital, the coloreds only entrance to the hospital. And on my birth certificate, it says that my race is colored, not Negro, not African American. It says colored. And growing up in that town, also realizing that, the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954 was 11 years before I was born. But the schools were still segregated in that town when I was born. But by the time I became of the age to start school, a federal judge had ordered the state of Mississippi to integrate the schools. And so I was part of the first group of students in my hometown to attend integrated schools in the history of the town. And what's interesting is when my family left Mississippi in 1973 and moved to Milwaukee from 3rd through 8th grade in Milwaukee, I didn't have a single white classmate at all, Dr. Hall. I went to all Black schools at every school I attended until I went to high school. I went to Milwaukee Trade and Technical High School. I caught the city bus to the South Side. And that was my first time having white classmates in Milwaukee. So I really went from an integrated school system in the South to a segregated school system in Milwaukee that I didn't really think about it at the time. I didn't recognize the fact that there were no white people in our neighborhood. And those things really helped me to kind of understand and share with people my passion for this work. This work that I do is very personal to me. I know I can tell you the name of the man who enslaved my family in Mississippi. I've traced my family history back to the late 1700s, was as far back as I could go. I know all about the family of the man who enslaved my family because I was fortunate enough to get in contact with his great-great-granddaughter, and she and I became very good friends. And she shared with me his family history going all the way back to the time that he lived in Germany. And so that connection really allowed me to learn more about who I am by learning about who my family was. And I know from a little bit that you shared with me about your family's history, I'm sure that that's part of the driving passion that you have as well.
Well, and it is, we had to smile because my grandfather was born in Newton, Mississippi, and I was saying, so do you know where Newton, Mississippi is? And I've been trying to learn more because my grandfather was somewhat silent about his growing up. And I think there was a lot of pain there, because he came up north, part of that great migration to get work. But my grandfather was the deacon in the church, but he was an entrepreneur. He had his own gas station, bought a home, brought his mother up to make sure she lived there. His siblings moved to the Chicago area, but he became the first Black city councilman in a small town called Albion, Michigan. He became the first county supervisor in Calhoun County. There's a park named after him. And what I remember growing up is just watching him stand tall no matter what. And my grandfather, he was born in 1898. So of course he's not living anymore. But what I know about my family history on that side is that my grandfather made sure that integration occurred, quite frankly, right down the street, because he became very frustrated when my mother and her brother could not go to the school 2 or 3 blocks away from the house. They had to go across town. and interestingly, watch white children go in front of their house and go to the neighborhood school. So finally, my grandfather just said, you know, I'm keeping my kids home. And so the city fathers tried to get him fired, but his employer had so much respect for him, basically said, that's your problem. My grandparents, because my grandmother stayed at home because they were raising 5 children, went to school board meeting after school board meeting until they finally gave in. And my mother and her brother went to that school down the street. Now, I say all that to say that at that time, that took a lot of courage. And, you know, he could have been hurt. There were not the same kind of protections, but he stood his ground. And, you know, when you grow up and you're watching this, you don't really know how that is impacting you. But what I realized when I look at my family, I'm kind of the one that has been in the nonprofit, you know, been in the front reins around trying to do this mission-driven type of work, but always focused on equity, always focused on equality, always trying to look at how can we provide more opportunities for our children, for adults, etc. But that drive, I think, came from just even watching him. And, you know, that I could go to the other side of the family with my father, with the historically Black colleges and universities, the role that they played in Florida and along the East Coast, which is how I got to FAMU. So understanding the history of the strong education, but we also spoke a little bit about the impact of Brown versus the Board of Topeka, which, you know, everyone celebrates, but the impact that it actually had on the Black community, where thousands of African-American teachers and administrators were technically fired because they closed a lot of our schools. And so while I think the original intent around desegregation, integration was also about access to resources, that no matter where Black children were being educated, that we would also have the same resources as others, kind of led to some unintended consequences, which really, I think to this day, as we mentioned earlier, we've not yet recovered because we've been struggling ever since to even have more diversity in terms of teachers, which can be beneficial for Black and white students as we continue to learn from each other.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. You know, I don't think many people are aware of the details of the Brown decision and really the ramifications of it for Black parents who lost schools that they felt very good about. You know, it wasn't about having their children sit in a classroom with white children. That's not what they were asking for. They were simply asking for their schools to have the same level of resources and funding that white schools had. You know, I was able to find some old photographs from when my mother was a student back in the 40s. And what I was able to find were images of the library in the Black school in my hometown and the library in the white school in my hometown. And it's very interesting to compare and contrast those two images, because in the photograph from the library in the white school, it's a fully stocked library. I mean, in the entire library, all the way around it, you see shelves and shelves of books. But in the Black library, the school that my mother attended, you had, you know, a couple bookshelves, and there were only like 3 rows that were full of books. So obviously, access to books in the library was different. The buildings looked completely different. You know, they had very dedicated teachers, highly qualified Black teachers. But as you said, Dr. Hall, many of those teachers lost their jobs as a result of them closing the Black schools, and they couldn't get a job at the white school. And that is something that we haven't fully recovered from. And it makes a difference. You know, there have been many studies over the years that have shown for Black children in particular that having a Black teacher really makes a big difference. One instance of how it plays out is when you are in high school and placement in gifted and talented classes. Studies show consistently that Black teachers assign Black and white students to gifted and talented programs at about the same rate. But when you have white teachers, they're much less likely to assign Black students to gifted and talented programs as they are to assign white students. So it does make a difference. And kind of thinking about where we are now with the crisis that we're all dealing with Education-wise, we're very concerned in many communities, obviously, over what's going to happen this upcoming school year. But we know in our community in particular, there are still a lot of families that are going to struggle if it's a virtual environment because they don't have access to computers and tablets. Many of them have access to the internet, high-speed internet in particular. Even if they do have a computer, they may have 3 children and just one computer for them to share. So it's going to be a huge challenge for us to figure out how to help those students, and particularly the types of students you and I work with, special needs students, who are really going to struggle because you need specialized training. Parents cannot teach special education students. They don't have the skills necessary to do so. And doing it virtually is much more difficult than it is to do it physically. So I think that we should all be thinking about what we can do moving forward as we get out of this pandemic, what we can do to make up for what these young people are going to miss as a result of the way the crisis is played out in our school districts. I know that I have some ideas about things that we can do, but I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on, the current state of education, what it's going to look like moving forward, particularly for young people from our community?
So the same concern. We're both teachers. So I was a learning disabilities teacher, Tampa, Florida, but my concern is the digital divide. And I'm concerned about the ground that's going to be lost in an already existing situation of achievement gaps. And so in order to address this, it is definitely going to take this entire community to wrap our arms around those that have less resources, because there is no way that we can continue with the huge gaps between communities, because in the end, we really are going to pay for this. And I get very passionate about closing the gap, because so often I think there's a comfort level that it's okay. And we don't, unless you're totally connected, you don't feel it, especially if you have resources. And, I think even, you and I, we would make sure our kids are okay. But not everyone is in that situation. And we have to understand again that we need everyone, as many citizens as possible, to be strong. We need all of our children to be prepared for the future and be leaders and be able to have quality lives. So this is another way that, again, COVID is showing the inequities because of the lack of hotspots and hardware. The other piece of this is mobility and eviction rates that may be occurring. That is going to have a double impact on our families, because we know many of the people that lost jobs during this time were essential workers. Who were the essential workers? They were Black and brown individuals. These are Black and brown individuals, many of them in Milwaukee public schools, very caring parents who are trying to make it and make sure their kids are okay. How is all of this going to work? What is the role that we need to continue to look at playing, whether it's you and myself, it's Rotary, it's our community organizations. But we have to get very serious about partnering with Milwaukee Public Schools to see where they are, partnering with even our other schools, and see what we can continue to do to make sure we lose as less traction as possible. But that digital divide is going to be the killer for us if we don't make sure that somehow all of our kids are connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about the digital divide is that it's really related to economics. We have when you look at the city of Milwaukee, every community of color has poverty rates that are above 30%.
Correct.
And, we have these ongoing issues related to the lack of access to high quality family supporting wage jobs. I like to tell people, as I've studied the history of Milwaukee, as it relates to segregation, we think of segregation, but we don't really think about what drove Black people to come to Milwaukee in the 1940s was the loss of jobs in Mississippi. When the mechanized cotton pickers came into being, one cotton picker machine could do the work of 50 individuals. So a lot of Blacks left the South in large numbers. They came to Milwaukee because we had good jobs here, right? You know, we had the breweries and the
That's
tanneries.
right.
We had, you know, all of these factories that made goods that were sold around the world. And we literally were the machine shop of the world. That was a nickname for Milwaukee back in the 50s. But we lost most of those manufacturing jobs. In fact, since 1963, the city of Milwaukee alone has lost 92,000 of those jobs. Over 50,000 of those have been lost since 1982. And so what they've been replaced with in many respects are these low wage service sector jobs that, you know, we call essential jobs. You know, there was a study done by the New York Times recently where they said that, you know, only 20% of Black workers in the country have a job that allows them to work from home. And
That's
about
right.
32% of white workers in the country have those types of jobs. So we know that there are a lot of people who are on the front lines exposed to this coronavirus. We've all heard about and seen
Mhm.
disparities for Native Americans, Latinos, and Blacks in particular around the country. But what we don't really talk much about is why some of those issues are occurring. A lack of access to health,
Right.
a lack of being treated the same when they go to healthcare practitioners. You know, people in Milwaukee forget that we've had 2 hospitals that closed in Milwaukee since I moved back to Milwaukee.
And that was big.
Yeah, you know,
And
to
when you reminded me of that, that
Mhm.
was huge because of what just happened with St. Joseph's. And I think we all know on this call that St. Joseph's was on the brink. And we still have to really make sure that that hospital, because that is really the only health facility. But the other piece of this, Reggie, too, is home ownership. You know, that was our way of having assets, a way of having some kind of generational transitional wealth. It was a way for us to start our businesses because of the equity. And when those jobs were lost, we lost our homes. And now we're at, what is it, 1 in 4 Blacks, when you compare to whites, own their home versus 3 to 4 whites, you know, own a home. 3 out of 4 own their home. And we know that that is the beginning of any kind of asset building or wealth building is home ownership. And Milwaukee rates at, you know, one of the lowest in terms of minority home ownership, especially amongst African Americans. So this economic parity and equity is so critical to us being able to have the resources and education, have the health care and benefits that we need based on the job that we have, being able to get the loans that we need, as you mentioned. It just impacts all of our areas. Those who are entrepreneurs, when we're looking at what's happening across the country with those that are closing, I think it was like 450,000 African American owned businesses and businesses of color that are closing because they don't have the additional resources to stay open during this time.
Right. And the long-term impact of that is going to be really, it's going to be a difficult time for many of us, but certain communities will be defined by this in ways that others aren't, as you said. You know, thinking about what the home ownership rate gap is here locally. One of the things that people don't talk about is that gap has been widening, but nationally as well as locally. You know, the Black home ownership rate nationally in 1968, when the Federal Fair Housing Act was passed, was about 41.3%. It's currently about 42.5%. It actually peaked in 2005 at about 50% nationally, but it's gone down every year since then. Part of that has been related to the Great Recession that we've all forgotten about, that devastated so many communities. The Black community in particular really is still trying to recover from the Great Recession when this current recession hit. And the home ownership, as you said, is that toolbox that people have because they can borrow against that equity, right? They can get through difficult times like now. They
That's
have,
right.
you know, that equity to fall back on. They can make repairs to their home. You know, they can go on nice trips. They can live the American dream because that's really the foundation of American wealth. It's not in our stock portfolios or our bank account, our savings account. Most American wealth is tied up in the ownership of our homes. And when you see a community like the Black community in Milwaukee that used to have a very robust home ownership level because of those family supporting wage jobs, to lose what we've lost and then to be blamed for losing that without people understanding the underlying causes of us coming to Milwaukee for jobs, leaving the South, leaving Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, to come to Milwaukee to work. And then when those jobs go away, people say that we're lazy. Well, lazy people don't leave their homes in the South and move to Milwaukee. They come here to work and the jobs went away. We didn't own any of the companies that went out of business. We didn't own Schlitz or Pabst or many of the other companies that went out of business and kind of left us. And I think our leaders, our leaders, whether they be elected officials and business leaders, really need to understand that part of what you're hearing from our community in particular over the last several months is this call for really providing resources that we see spent. Billions of dollars have been spent in downtown Milwaukee, right? And we're asking, well, when is some of that money going to come to our community to help fix up our communities and make our communities thriving? And one of the things that's been really, I think, understood, people don't really get this. They don't grasp, because I don't think people have articulated the whole idea of defunding police really isn't about police. I think that it's really about what happened in the 60s when Lyndon Johnson was president. He started a war on poverty, right? And they funded the war on poverty, but eventually they defunded many of the aspects of the war on poverty, not because of the Vietnam War. Before the Vietnam War really started to take up resources, he started a war on crime as well, which people don't really know about. You know, they think about the war on drugs under Nixon and Reagan, but people don't know that Lyndon Johnson started a war on crime and really started to shift resources from the war on poverty to the war on crime. And what people are asking when they say defund police, they're asking to reverse that course over the last 50 years of putting money into resources to prevent poverty. They're simply asking for you to reverse course and do what you were doing in the 60s trying to fight poverty, instead of putting so many of our resources into policing. They want to see.
Right. If I could interject on that too, Reggie, though, kind of when you're taking the history back on that piece, the history back on the GI Bill, because, you know, when we speak about those changes, when the GI Bill occurred and, you know, those who fought in the war were able to get homes, guaranteed loans, etc., that was not afforded to many of our men that came back. And so our own government would not sign. They would co-sign, but they would not guarantee. So that was really the beginning of building the middle class in this country. Absolutely. That Black people did not get a chance to fully participate in. So you think about the crime bill, but you'll also go back to when we speak about economic equity and an opportunity to get that jump start. Many, too many did not get that jump start at all to create that beginning wealth.
Absolutely. So. And the other part of the GI Bill, is the education portion where Black GIs who came back, including two of my mother's uncles who came back from fighting in World War II and went back to Mississippi hoping to be able to go to college. But, you know, they only had limited places they could go. There were only about 100 historically Black colleges, universities. Many of them were still more or less junior colleges at that time. And there were 19 states back at that time that had separate colleges for Blacks and whites. And people forget that there were only 11 states that broke away and formed the Confederate States of America. Yet you had 8 additional states that had, you know, separate colleges for Blacks and whites. And there's a study done in 1947 that showed that only about 4.5% of Black GIs were able to take advantage of the educational portion of the GI Bill. And as you said, Dr. Hall, that really set the stage for building the middle class in the white community, having the opportunity to go to college and get, you know, higher level jobs, career types of jobs, but also having that home ownership tied to that as well. If we could go back and fix anything in American history, I think that would be something that I would want to fix before anything else. Because if we had leveled the playing field as it should have been at that time, we would not have had a need for a crime bill in 1965 because people would have been self-sufficient in so many of those communities. So, you know, there are a lot of issues that we're dealing with today that are directly related to things from the past that are unresolved issues that we've either ignored or simply just not put the types of resources into fixing. And these are the things that you're hearing people talk about now. These are the things that people are beginning to understand. And I always look at the health of our community as the same as a kidney in your body, right? So if you have a kidney that's problematic, well, your doctor's going to say you better take care of that kidney because it's going to impact other organs in your body eventually. It may cause some problems with your heart and other organs, right? So I look at us having a community that is hurting in so many different ways, so many disparities, that hurts all of us, that hurts the entire community. All of us pay for poverty, whether we're living in poverty circumstances or not. All of us are paying for poverty. It's very expensive. Dealing with poverty is exceptionally expensive. All of us, our property taxes, and the taxes that we pay on the state and federal level, all of these go to providing assistance for people living in poverty. So all of us are paying for poverty. It really would make a lot of sense for us to attack poverty in the way that they planned to do back in the 60s, to really alleviate poverty, bring people out of poverty. That's the key, because a lot of the problems that we see are directly related to a lack of money that people have. And home ownership, I think, would go a long way, providing loans and access to loans. We know that there's tremendous discrimination in home owner, mortgage lending. Associated Bank, Wells Fargo Bank, Countrywide Financial were each sued by the federal government for offering different loans for Black and Hispanic borrowers, giving them subprime loans when they were eligible for prime loans, versus whites who had the same credit worthiness. They really did a huge disservice to the Black and brown community around the country. And we're all dealing with that. We really have to understand that this isn't a zero-sum game, that all of us are in this together, as you said earlier, and the health of any community really impacts the health of our society in general.
Well, Reggie and Eve, thank you so much. I had just a hard time finding a way to say thank you, because you have so much to say. But I want to make sure that we have a minute or two here for some Q&A, and Michelle's going to flip us over to a gallery view. One question that came up was that you had mentioned, Reggie, that you really have some ideas for what should happen once we move out of COVID to make up for the losses that our students have experienced. Do you want to take a moment to talk about that?
Yeah, and this may be controversial. As a former teacher, I can say definitively that in the years that I taught in Milwaukee public schools, and I'm sure Dr. Hall had similar experiences, is that there's a fundamental shift that's taken place in the way that children interact with education. Children nowadays are much more likely to be invested in electronic devices, right? They've grown up in a digital age where they've lived with a cell phone in their hand since they were very young in age. They communicate that way. They communicate differently. And I think the way that we do schooling has not adjusted to the way that young people are living. We imagine this. We still teach, in many ways, we still teach the same way we did 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Society has changed. Children have changed. And as I shared with Dr. Hall, one of the things that I tried to do as a teacher was to infuse technology in my classroom as much as possible. Allow the students access to technology. Having a smart board in my classroom that I'm using as a screen to show some YouTube video is useless if I don't allow the students to come up and touch and do things on the smart board in my classroom. Providing them access to learn how technology works. Not just, they know all about cell phones, right? And tablets and computers, but give them access to know how these devices are created. Having them have an interest in those things so that they can move into those STEM fields. I think it's critically important that, and I think this is going to happen for sure, we are going to reassess the way we do education as a result of what's happening with the COVID crisis. It's not going to be the same when we come out of this. And I'm hoping that we begin to look at some of the things that were problematic before the crisis hit and ask ourselves, are we doing what fits with the way young people are today? We still use an agrarian calendar for schools, which doesn't make any sense. We don't have people harvesting crops the way we used to. So I think fundamentally, shifting the way that we as educators interact with our students, and just as importantly, our parents. One of the things that I tried to do was to make sure that I got to know the parents of my students really, really well, develop a close relationship with them, because I told my parents this all the time. Listen, when you come to parent-teacher conference, I'm going to let you know that during the day that your children are at school, they're spending more time with me during their awake hours than they are with you. So it makes sense for you to have a good relationship with that individual or individuals that are spending that much time with your children. I think that we've gotten away from some of the things that make school fun, because we have evaluated schools based on math and reading standardized test scores. We pushed aside art. We pushed aside music. We pushed aside a lot of the classes that were fun for me when I was in school, that made me want to come to school and have a good time in certain classes, you know, and we've defunded those and made them not important. And even science, believe me, as a teacher, I can tell you, we don't put as much emphasis on science and social studies as we used to, because every school is working on raising their math and their reading test scores, because that's the only scores they're really evaluated on. We really have to shift away from evaluating schools based on those things and really provide an understanding that we have to listen to what our students are telling us. I did this. I listened to my students. If they told me that they were bored, I'm like, what's boring you? Tell me what's boring about what we're doing, and try to make adjustments based on the feedback that we're getting from students and parents.
Well, Reggie, that goes into teacher training too, because that kind of mindset is so important in terms of you listening. But I think even around the new continued training of our teachers around digital literacy is going to make a difference in their comfort level to work with our children differently in the way you're talking about.
Absolutely.
And it is almost 1 o'clock, so I'm going to have to thank you, but let everyone know that you are welcome to continue to stay on, to continue this conversation. There are a few questions in the chat that I haven't been able to bring forward. And I would go back to something that Dr. Hall said, which I think they would both be welcome to, which is to use this as an opportunity to ask the questions you were afraid to ask. I mean, we have two really compelling people who are very engaging and are I think willing to ask the awkward, to answer the awkward or the tough question. So thank you. This has been incredibly insightful. I've seen lots of positive comments here, and I'm going to ask President Darren to close the meeting down here, and then we can move to informal conversation.
Thank you, Mary. Dr. Hall, Reggie, in honor of leaders like you who speak to our club, we will be making a donation to in your name to the YWCA of Southeastern Wisconsin, whose mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. Tune in this Thursday at noon for our snack program to get an update about COVID-19 from Dr. Bob. Next Tuesday, our conversation will be between Rotarian Kent Laverne and Dale Borman Jr., the president of the Milwaukee Police Association. The formal portion of this meeting is adjourned, but please stick around to continue the conversation. We're adjourned.
I have a question for Dr. Hall or Mr. Jackson. Should we eliminate the summer session in MPS and have a 365-day school year with a number of breaks? And what would be the big hang